stunned today at I don't know, excuse me, we've been sitting here working on a story for pretty much half the day today.
Right.
We did the show yesterday on UNLV having conversations with the Big 12 before they signed the grant of rights in the Mountain West.
Mm-hmm.
Our reporting yesterday pretty much confirmed by the multitude of phone calls we got this morning from multiple sources around the Big 12, the Pac-12, the Mountain West. Like, we heard from a lot of corners of the college football world about UNLV. And one of the things that happened was we started hearing a consistent storyline from people not connected to each other who don't know each other, which is always, that's big time red flags. When you're talking to multiple executives and administrators who are telling you, hey, like this one person I was talking to earlier this morning said, you know, I'm calling you because I want to talk to you about this, because I've known this person for several years now. We've shared information, and this person was telling me, hey, I'm hearing that during mediation, a merger was brought back to the table. That conversation was brought back to the table, back into the ethos, if you will, of the future. What are possibilities? What are remedies?
Right.
Because remember what mediation is. Mediation is where you have an independent third party standing between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. They're exchanging ideas. The mediator is not somebody that is a current sitting judge who's making, legal decisions like it's arbitration. No, this is an exchange of ideas. And we heard from multiple sources that the Mountain West, again, brought to the table the idea of a merger. And so we started working on confirming that story. And I'm telling you this because what we're going to talk about here in a minute is absolutely stunning. It is not what we intended on talking about today, but in the last hour, multiple phone calls happened. And maybe I said to Jake, why are we on the phone 40 minutes, 30 minutes before the show? And he said, because people are getting out of meetings and coming out of lunch, which is true. But we're talking to people about what is going on in the Mountain West and in the Pac-12. And one of the questions we've run through the show for 6 weeks, why haven't any of the exiting members of the Mountain West sent letters, sent deposits, signed grant of rights? Why don't we have action? Why don't we have a new media rights deal in the Pac-12? And I was talking to administrators across college football today, familiar with the situation, said, well, have you guys talked to Scott Barnes, the athletic director at Oregon State? And I said, well, I've tried, right? Because I've covered Scott Barnes since his Utah State days.
Yeah.
Scott Barnes isn't saying much. And apparently Scott Barnes isn't saying much to a lot of people. But in recent times, he's had conversations with the Big 12. And I was like, are you sure? Like, what do you mean? But Scott Barnes, now multiple sources have confirmed that Scott Barnes in recent times has reached out to the Big 12 and the ACC to talk about membership in that conference. I was like, well, okay. I mean, I understand that he's not contractually tied to anybody for 2026. Scott Barnes is a phenomenal operator, a phenomenal administrator.
Right.
But wait a minute, you're forming a new conference where you're having members that were foundational members of the Mountain West leave the Mountain West to join the Pac-12, but you're out allegedly talking to the Big 12. And I say allegedly because I haven't asked Scott Barnes this. I want to be very upfront with you. We've heard it from multiple independent sources that Scott Barnes at Oregon State reached out to the Big 12 and the ACC. Okay, I kind of understand that. But what about this merger thing? Here's the other conversation.
Right.
What about this merger thing? Who in the Pac-12 is standing between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West having substantial conversations about merging? Because remember, before all of this scheduling agreement nonsense, there was allegedly a framework in place that could have led to a merger. And then all of a sudden that died. And the Pac-12 has been a hard no since the scheduling agreement and the poaching penalties, and we're leaving and they're staying. And it's been a hard no since. Multiple independent sources today, sources who don't know each other and don't know we're talking, said to us today that the exiting members of the Mountain West are absolutely open to conversations about a merger.
Mm-hmm.
So if the exiting members of the Mountain West are open to the idea of a merger, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute, but if they're open to the idea of a merger, who's really standing in the way? Who's standing in the way in the Pac-12 of doing what pretty much every TV executive I speak to, every administrator I speak to, everybody with common sense realizes is the right tack to take, which is merging the two together under a single entity to be the dominant athletic conference on the West Coast.
And the best G5.
Hands down. Who's standing in the way of that? Well, it would appear that it is Washington State, Oregon State, and Teresa Gould. The old guard Pac-12. It would appear. Because we have multiple sources telling us in the Mountain West, outside of the Mountain West, that the exiting members of the Mountain West are open to the idea of a merger. They see, and here's why, because this is really important. The exiting members of the Mountain West, as our sources, multiple sources have told us, are wondering how much money a media rights deal in a new reimagined Pac-12 that doesn't include a merger, how much money are they going to make there?
Or not make.
And how much money are they leaving on the table by not merging? And I think that is the real instability in the Pac-12 ecosystem right now. I think there is real instability in that conference. I think what conference? The supposed conference, right? Because they don't have a conference at this moment. And we don't know. I have not been told that there is, paper just sitting in a manila folder waiting to be made public with signatures. I've been told that. I have been told the new members have not signed a grant of rights in the Pac-12. I have not heard once that any of the exiting members have filed a letter and a fee, the deposit on that fee, the $5,000 to leave the conference. I have not heard one time that even one of them have. Maybe they have, and maybe I'm just not talking to the right people. Very possible. I'm just little old Monty over here.
Right.
Maybe I'm not talking to the right people. But I can tell you between the two of us, we talk to a lot of people, and we haven't heard that once.
Right.
And usually that's the kind of thing that you would hear when you talk to enough people. When there's a bunch of chefs in the stew and you're talking to all of them independently, usually you hear things.
Well, and I think the other really interesting thing, and this is not the first time with this situation we've brought this up or talked about it, is the prospect, for these 5 schools leaving the Mountain West, like, okay, well, what happens if the Pac-12 thing doesn't work out? Like, if they get cold feet and they don't want to leave, what are their options? And so this conversation of, hey, could those schools come back to the conference? Could then the Mountain West kind of, become this juggernaut on the West Coast? Because obviously you've added some schools already. You would be getting back, or I guess, keeping your best brands. I think that's a really powerful scenario for these schools in the Mountain West to ponder, right? I mean, nobody's saying that nobody's using words like that's likely or something like that. But I think when you're looking at, hey, what is best case scenario if you're, Boise State, or if you're any of these schools that are looking at this, well, it's kind of hard to run from the fact that best case scenario would be getting back on solid footing from a TV deal perspective, getting back on solid footing from a conference affiliation perspective. And I have to say, as I get older, this is also something I appreciate: the peace of mind and being able to sleep at night, knowing that you don't have to worry about, when this is and that's happening, how the mediation's going to go.
Yeah.
When you're like, I think people grossly discount how much mental, capacity this thing is taking up in people's lives to try to figure this out. And at some point, the cute kids saying is the math stops mathing. And I feel like we're getting to a point in this conversation where people involved seemingly are starting to have those thoughts, because we hadn't heard before today. There was no, Scott Barnes and all this. None of this was coming up. Like this whole concept of, hey, like they're actually vetting all of their options. It's not just Pac-12 or merge. It's actually everything's on the table, potentially, allegedly. Like that's a whole different dynamic.
Well, and what that says is they're not all in on the Pac-12.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And again, I want to make this really clear. I have not spoken to Oregon State about this. I have not asked Scott Barnes about this directly. My intention is in the next little few minutes here, I will send him an email and ask him for comment on it. And likely I will not hear back. But I have no reason to question the people who are telling me this. And I can tell you, my belief is that this mediation has to go well for the new Pac-12 to happen, for the new Pac-12 to be formed as we know it today, right? And we can keep pushing the banner up there, and we can keep talking about this. My opinion now is that you have people looking at plan Bs.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if that is not the road to prosperity? And my biggest question is, who is blocking a merger in the Pac-12?
Yeah.
Who in the Pac-12 is standing between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West, having conversations about becoming the dominant athletic conference on the West Coast?
Who is once again standing in the way of a dominant West Coast conference having a chance to survive?
Because that's what this is. You put these two leagues together in some form or fashion, because I do not believe that it would just be lock, stock, and barrel, everybody slams into one conference. You'd have to wonder, like, what happens to San Jose State? What happens? Is San Jose State a forever member? What about Gonzaga? Because we know that Gonzaga didn't want to be a P4. They had an open invite to join the Big 12, and they chose the new Pac-12. Like, everybody's looking at a plan B. And my belief is that if the two merged, Gonzaga would be all in. Because at that point, I don't even care what you think of the Pac-12 brand. I think my guess is it would be Pac-12 something.
Yeah, I mean, who cares what the marketing materials are? I mean, I think you look at the makeup of the schools.
Doesn't almost matter.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the capabilities of Gonzaga in the tournament. You look at Boise State. You mean, you guys all know the top line narratives and the power players in that conference. And I think the thing that is striking to me now, having talked about the Pac-12 in one form or fashion for going on 3 years now. I mean, it's been kind of a saga at this point. But one of the things that really stands out to me also is this concept of, okay, well, hey, if in recent times, I don't know when, but recently, clearly, allegedly, Scott Barnes had been talking to the ACC and the Big 12. That also really stands out to me, because if that was in recent times, let's be generous and say in the new year in Q1, like, Scott Barnes is a really smart guy. Like, this is someone who's a veteran. We are
big fans of Scott Barnes on this show.
Like, this is someone who's a veteran at what he does. He is really savvy. Like, this guy is smart. Like, you guys need to understand that. And, the last time on technicality you heard from Scott Barnes was when he commented on the media deal they got for this coming season, talking about how like ESPN is a great partner and all the options and all the places. Okay, cool. But we haven't really heard Scott Barnes go in on this conversation in quite some time. And to me, the last time I can think of hearing from him is all the way back to when it became clear that Oregon State was not going to be part of the Big 12, schools that they were scooping up out of the Pac-12 chaos. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, hey, what's today's date, guys? Oh, that's right. Today's the 20th. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Bro, that means you have 10 days, dude.
Essentially, yeah.
You essentially have 10 days to figure this thing out. And by the way, and Scott knows this, and you guys probably know this, but I just want to bring it up because I think it's a valid point. Bro, you don't have the advantage or the luxury or the convenience of quote unquote going back to the Mountain West. Right? If you're Oregon State, you don't have that luxury. You want to talk about plan Bs? What's the plan B for Oregon State? And obviously, by extension, Washington State. But you're just going to go independent? Because now all of a sudden, and here, let me be the a-hole, the Calford deal is looking really nice for these two. Now that they go back and look at it.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Maybe Oregon State and Washington State have some regret. Maybe they don't. But all I'm telling you is typically in college athletics, you're always trying to be, quote unquote, secure, know what conference you're going to be part of, know what your TV deal looks like, know what your schedule is going to be specifically in football, but obviously throughout your athletic department. In my opinion, the best athletic departments have that unlocked for 3 years ahead of time. That to me is ideal. You look at any great athletic department and they've got that thing unlocked for about 3 years. Maybe some games, they got a schedule or whatever, but they know their conference. They know their distribution deal and what that's going to look like. So the concept of, hey, we have essentially 10 days here to try to get mediation correct. And, we got to deal with the leadership at Washington State. We got to deal with Teresa Gould. And again, my opinion, not reporting anything, my opinion, her stubbornness in this situation, because I feel she's been stubborn based on what hasn't gotten done, mainly a merger, mainly pragmatic decision-making, mainly, trying to find the best solution for everyone involved. Like, I'm just sitting here saying, dude, you're running out of time. And I like Scott Barnes. Scott Barnes is a great administrator.
I respect Scott Barnes.
Yeah, like love the guy. It's awesome. But ultimately, Oregon State, and this is something you guys need to consider in terms of decision-making for Scott Barnes and what he's looking at. Bro, you just went from being, in my opinion, one of the underdog darlings of the old Pac-12, a team that just upgraded Reeser, has great facilities, has, and I don't think a ton of people know about it because they're not playing big-time football right now, like in terms of size and marketability of games, but a great home field advantage to that stadium. So you just put out money a couple years ago to renovate your football stadium before you knew you wouldn't be in a power league anymore. And now you're sitting here having no idea where home is going to be. You don't know if you're flying to freaking Virginia or if you're just up and down the West Coast. You have no idea. You could not say, like, Scott cannot say with certainty today where they're going to be. And that to me is the crime in all of this. We're sitting here today getting calls and we're left feeling like, yeah, dude, like, honestly, it's the 5 schools who are looking at leaving the Mountain West to go to the Pac-12 or Pac-2 or whatever they're calling themselves.
Yeah.
And now, because, and again, it just feels this way based on the conversations, based on what everyone is saying that we heard today, it just feels like the old Pac-12 is at work. It feels like Teresa Gould and that front office, if you will, is just like dying on the hill of not merging. And Oregon State and schools like Oregon State that are involved are left in the wake. And frankly, there's nothing they can do about it. I mean, honestly, what are the options? Like, the 5 who are looking at leaving the Mountain West can go back. That's on the table. You can go back.
You believe that?
I believe that, yeah, because the thing is, it would benefit the Mountain West.
I think
Like the Mountain West doesn't want to lose Boise State. That doesn't make sense.
I think that is correct. I think that in talking to current members and some of the exiting members, I do believe that they could go back. I do believe there's an avenue for them to go back. We asked that question specifically today, and it wasn't an absolutely, but I can tell you sources at multiple spots involved in this process have made it clear that there is a bridge back.
And most importantly, it wasn't an absolutely not.
That's exactly right.
You know, I think that's the best way to kind of characterize it.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it's really important to understand that there's a lot at risk here for everybody involved, and we need to respect the fact that careers, lives, and legacies are on the line here. So when we talk about this stuff, we're not just sitting here talking about it willy-nilly. We have worked hard to, get multiple sources to confirm everything that we're talking about today. And if you're just tuning into the show, one of the really interesting conversations we've had over the last 24 hours at this point is that there are real questions about now, internally and externally, why the Pac-12 and the Mountain West are not having merger talks. Because our sources have told us that multiple times the Mountain West has approached the Pac-12 about merging, and it's been a hard no. And we were asked specifically by multiple people today, who is standing in the way of those conversations? And we are hearing that the exiting members of the Mountain West are open to a merger. There's not a situation where, and I asked this question specifically, is it a thing where you don't want to be in business and the answer was no, not at all. The problem now is we don't know what we're getting into in the Pac-12 because it was assumed by now that there would be a new media rights deal for 2026 and beyond.
Right.
And that has not come to fruition. It was assumed by now that all this legality would have been taken care of, and it is not. And there are a lot of questions. I can tell you one source today asked me point blank, what took so long to get to mediation? And it's something we had this exact discussion on the show.
Bro, we talked about it. It's so funny how this works. So we talked about that. We raised that question. Specifically, remember, and go back and listen. I want to say we had this conversation about what is holding up mediation. The time is ticking, like in October, November, because I remember that. If you guys remember, what was the narrative at that time? Well, the narrative was, hey, they're gonna have a media rights deal by the end of the year, right? Like, hey, but you know, before the holidays really get going, you could probably expect it to be late November. Once December gets here, a lot of people are on vacation, and these people like to check out. So the concept that there's no media rights deal done for 26 and beyond, and you have 10 days or so left on the clock here to figure this out. This is, in my opinion, if you take the Pac-12, opinions and feelings out of it, and you just said, hey, there's a conference out there that's fighting for its life, and it's got 10 days to figure it out, I would say that most of you would bet your life savings that conference isn't going to make it. And that's what scares me is I don't want the Pac-12 to not make it. Like it's heartbreaking to me. And we said this when it happened. Dude, I don't want to have to do shows about schools and administrators having to back channel with other schools to try to get to their next conference when they weren't expecting to have to leave or get out of their current conference. And dude, it's absolute chaos, man. Like, it's chaos on top of the chaos happening with the House settlement, with NIL and recruiting and the portal, and there is no end. It's as if there's like a black hole of if it's not one thing, it's the other. So I have no dog really in this fight. I miss the old Pac-12. I could specifically reminisce about watching late night Oregon football game on ESPN, and it's just an absolute thriller, and you could care less about what time it is or what time you were getting up in the morning because you were watching that game.
Yeah, I am I am unchanged. I'm sick for Oregon State and Washington State fans. You were left, really Oregon State, because I feel like Scott Barnes damn near literally and figuratively went to his deathbed over this. And I think that I hope he replies. I emailed Scott Barnes. I copied the staff. I really hope they respond with a comment. I really hope that we're in a place where, even if it's a hard no, I think this is really important now that this is out here.
And the other thing is, too, we haven't heard word one from anybody in the Pac-12.
And listen, if we have it, we're not the biggest show in the world.
What?
If we have it, who else has it? Because these rumors are out there. These conversations are out there. And let me put a bow around it for you again, because I know we've had a ranging conversation here. Our sources are telling us that at mediation, the Mountain West and the Pac-12, which happened yesterday, and we have not heard any word that it's completed. We are hearing that in those conversations, excuse me, with the godforsaken cough again, but in those conversations, that merging was brought up again. And we talked about the fact that UNLV, before they signed their grant of rights with the Mountain West Conference, reached out to the Big 12. We were told today in a phone call this morning that, in fact, why don't you ask Scott Barnes about his conversations with the Big 12? And I specifically said, well, are you talking about when the Pac-12 was melting down? No, I'm not. In recent times. So I want you to understand, as we were sitting here, I just emailed Scott Barnes and asked him for a comment on if he has had conversations in the last 12 months with the Big 12. Has he had conversations in the last 12 months with the ACC? And has Oregon State signed a grant of rights with the Pac-12 beyond 2025? And I don't know how much clearer I can ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have emailed Scott in the past. I have not gotten a response. Is that because we're just the little old Monty show? Sure, could be. It could be. But I think one of the interesting things is every time we talk about something involving the Mountain West and the Pac-12, the phone rings. And it is without fail that somebody will say, hey, man, great job. You nailed that. But did you hear about this? Are you aware that this is going on? That's exactly where this came from. And some of the other interesting details, I get the feeling, and it is my opinion based on sourcing and conversations I've had, that the exiting 5 members of the Mountain West have some real trepidation right now. There is some real insecurity about where they're going to and what that deal is going to look like. Because at this point in time, you cannot have a real grasp on what your revenue situation is and how financially stable you are beyond this 2025 year, because you don't have a media rights deal. You don't have a grant of rights signed. You don't know what your revenue and your expenses are going to be, because you don't know what your travel is going to look like. It is, in my opinion, a very dangerous time if you are a fan or a supporter or a principal in the Pac-12, because I think there are real questions to be answered in this mediation. I think if the Pac-12 does not find a way to mitigate a large percentage of these poaching fees, I think it's going to be very difficult to deliver on the financial promises that the Pac-12 made to these exiting members of the Mountain West. And I think it's very interesting that we have looked at UNLV, and a lot of people want to downplay UNLV's stature. Oh, they don't win football games. Doesn't matter if they win football games. Oh, they're broke. What is it? Okay. Does UNLV have significant financial considerations right now? Yeah, but who in this conference or the Pac-12 doesn't? Who in this situation isn't having to quite literally count every nickel, dime, and penny that they have for athletics? Everybody is. And if you're not, you're making a mistake. What I believe is UNLV did their homework. They did the legwork. They pulled out the abacus and started counting numbers on what a new Pac-12 would look like, and they chose not to fight the fight. They chose not to pay the lawyers. They chose not to sue the Mountain West. They chose not to get involved where I think a lot of others got involved, obviously. They chose to stay in the Mountain West. The Big 12, in my opinion, based on conversations I've had with sources directly with knowledge of that situation, was not an option. And UNLV chose to stay in the Mountain West. And it looks like, as of today, right now, they're the ones, they're kind of sitting on calm water. UNLV doesn't have questions about their future. UNLV does not have questions about their TV deal. UNLV does not have questions about their money. So we're in this situation now where if you're one of these exiting members of the Mountain West, you have a lot of questions. If you're going into the Mountain West, sure, you have questions. You have a TV deal for this year and next year. You got questions about the future, but you know what your travel is pretty much going to look like. You know what your money's pretty much going to look like. There aren't questions about like, well, are we going to have a media rights deal for 2026? The answer is yes in the Mountain West. The answer is I don't know in the Pac-12. That's quite literally the conversation that we are told is happening. And to back up what Jake said, I do believe that the Mountain West would take back the exiting members. And I do believe Gonzaga, Gonzaga would be part of that equation.
Yeah. And I just think, for Gonzaga, it's, this is much more of a black and white scenario. I mean, Gonzaga is just looking for, the best, situation they can get. They don't have to, they're going to be fine. They're going to be just fine. But I think that, again, I'm just saying that this, not to use these fancy words, but I feel like the proper word is like quotient, this weight, this factor of like, how long are we going to allow our university and its athletics to be up in the air, right? Or
how long
flux.
can we afford?
Yeah, well, and can we afford to pay lawyers and the whole legal portion? Like it's a lot, and I just feel like, I don't know. Again, this harkens back to the original day one conversation you and I had about this. What was the Pac-12 promising? What was the pitch? What did the fancy slide deck look like?
How leveraged are you?
Yeah, like what was the promise? If the promise was, hey, we're not going to pay any poaching fees or any exit fees or all that, we're going to negotiate out of those. I just don't know what the future looks like, if there is a future. I'm very. It concerns me based on the fact that we haven't really heard word one from anybody after the Wicker comments, and we're approaching June. Like, that tells me that you don't have some massive firepower here, that you don't have a lot of positive things to talk about. Because if you did, and again, no matter what you think of the Pac-12, I think we can all agree, if they got something to say or something to trumpet, they're going to trumpet it, right? Look no further than the coming in 2026 graphic. So it just tells me that we're coming down to the wire here. And the question of, hey, well, what happens if mediation doesn't go well, or if they can't figure it out? That's when I think you're going to find out for the Pac-12, and that's tough.
I think you have real questions. For the first time, you have real questions about the viability of these leagues. But this is what happens when you don't act with a high level of business intelligence.
Yeah.
And a high level of integrity and ethics. You create these messes that leave people hanging. Because when you start looking at the reality, and let's play the game that I always talk about in life. Best case scenario. I think the best case scenario is you merged the two leagues together. I think there are going to be some strays that get caught, maybe by some of the folks that are currently in the conference, because I would remind you, the Mountain West has a grant of rights.
Mm-hmm.
That grant of rights is signed. So those new members are in, right? And I point to people like San Jose State because it sucks. But isn't San Jose State right where Oregon State was?
Yes. Yes, they are along for the ride.
The simple reality is I think they're a passenger on this train right now.
Yeah.
They're not the conductor and they're not the engineer. And I think best case scenario is these leagues merge and there is as little bloodshed as a result of that as possible. Worst case scenario, I think the worst case scenario is these two leagues go forward and the exiting members go to the Pac-12. The new Mountain West is launched. And my belief is they will each wind up playing in a pond of $5, $6, $7 million if they're lucky. There are not two $8, $9, $10 million deals out there. If you put this league together, my guess is you would be real close to $10 million per school per year in a media rights deal.
Yeah, and I also think, not to state the obvious, but there would definitely be incentive-based revenue sharing or performance-based revenue sharing.
And I think the biggest issue that I have here is you're not getting anywhere near that, either one of these leagues. And you're looking at, again, a place where the Pac-12, they get a media rights deal for 2025, but where's the big press release? Where's the hoopla? We're on CBS. We're on ESPN.
Yeah.
There's not any.
How is there no interview to promote that?
They don't want to talk about the money, and they don't want to talk about the cost to do that deal.
Yeah.
Because it's not again, I'm going to remind you, and I'm not telling you how to live your life or what you know, or it's not how much money that you're grossing. What are you netting? What is the Pac-12 netting on their 2025 broadcast deal with the CW, ESPN, CBS? What is the net on that deal? I don't know either.
Yeah.
But it ain't $7 million. It's not. And I'm not going to speculate because a lot of people have. I don't know what that number looks like. But, you hear Pac-12 fans. When I said, hey, from what I understand, the burden of cost on producing those broadcasts is with the Pac-12. ESPN, CBS, they're going to provide the talent. And again, I talked to somebody in TV last week who said that includes, in most cases, a producer. Because ESPN and CBS want their broadcast to look and sound the way that ESPN and CBS broadcasts look and sound. So my guess is the personnel in the truck is probably on the Pac-12 books. The color guy, the play-by-play guy, the statistician, the producer, and the director in the truck.
Sideline interviewer.
All the talent, all the on-camera talent, the producer and the director in the truck belong to the broadcast network. So CBS and ESPN. Other than that, the equipment, the facility, all of it, the satellite time, all of it belong to the Pac-12. And they're lock, stock, and barrel covering the production costs for the CW. That's not cheap. And so when you look at the way that the future media rights deal goes on, you can't continue to do business like that.
No.
You can't do that.
It's not good enough.
So I'm really interested to see how all of this shakes out. But this is stunning to me. What is the information that's come to us over the last 24 hours about the instability, and I don't even know that instability is the right word, the insecurity that is looming over the Pac-12 right now is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there's any way for schools to feel good about the prospect of it. There's no way, again, and this is why I keep saying, if you're one of these exiting members from the Mountain West looking at this, what green flags do you have? What about this says, yeah, I should do this? That's what I'm trying to understand. It's not to say that the Pac-12 sucks or they're terrible. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is from a business perspective, and that's what these people do. They don't give a damn what you think the best player on the team is or anything like that. They're looking at, hey, how are we going to pay the bills plus make some money? That's the basic, generic version.
And again, I'm going to point to the fact that the average revenue at this level is not high. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue here. This isn't, man, this isn't Ohio State.
Right.
This isn't Alabama. This isn't even the ACC or the Big 12. You're talking about football programs, because I think the Mountain West is a pretty damn good basketball conference. I think we've talked about that.
Yeah.
You have small crowds. I point to San Diego State again, not to pick on JD Wicker, but you're not making tons of money on attendance and concessions and gear.
No, you're not, because you're not competitive. You don't have a reason for people to come out. That's the problem. And
when I look at the fact that in the Mountain West, you're talking about, what are we talking about? $5 million a year. The Mountain West, and this is from Nevada Sports Net on the 24th of or last summer. The Mountain West reported $78 million in revenue fiscal year 2023. You look at some of those numbers and you start looking at 2024 and 2025, and you're not playing in huge amounts of money, man.
But I think the thing is, just that number, take that number and then say, okay, with the schools the Mountain West has added, and then potentially bringing back the schools that were going to depart, if it were to go that way, that number is going up. You're not going to stay at 5.
Yeah, I neither one of these conferences will thrive.
Yeah.
And if it's $6 million per school, if it is, it's in a new deal where the Pac-12 and the Mountain West are fighting over windows and broadcast times and scheduling times, and it's not a pretty picture. This is not how you thrive and make money. It just is not. And I want people to understand that when you look at the way that, you look at Colorado State or, Oregon State, Research Stadium's 35,000. You look at the way that these numbers look. Boise State's 36,000. Fresno State, but you're never selling out Fresno State at 40,000, right? UNLV 65,000. How many times are they putting 65,000 fans in the seats for a UNLV football game at Allegiant?
Yeah,
you're not. UTEP, is UTEP putting 52,000 fans in their stadium? That would be amazing, but neither one of these conferences are just printing money or have a money tree growing in the athletic lobby. This is a really critical moment for the survival of both of these conferences. I think this mediation, if it does not, and again, I'm just going to say, if it does not lead to a merger, I have real concern that either one of these conferences will be able to thrive. They'll survive. I mean, people like Gloria Navarez, she's a phenomenal business person.
Yeah, they'll find a way.
They've got really good people on staff at the Mountain West. The Pac-12 has not struggled to make money. They've struggled to count money.
Yeah, and keep money.
But they haven't struggled to make money. They will make money, but they would be so much better off as one conference.
Yeah.
And there's about that much time left to make that happen. And I'm just going to keep leaning on the reporting that we've had on this show. I think Gloria Navarez would absolutely like to see a merger. I think if it meant that she had to step aside and not be the commissioner of whatever that league turned into, I think gladly strong, but I think she would absolutely step aside for the future prosperity of her membership. She absolutely would. And I need to know who specifically in the Pac-12 is saying no to a merger, because it is not the exiting 5 members of the Mountain West. It's not.
Yeah.
I don't, and I will continue to ask that question.
Yeah.
And again, I want to make this very clear. We have not spoken to Scott Barnes. I emailed him, and I am continuing to check my email. He has not emailed back, and he likely will not. But if it is in fact true, as our sources have told us, that Scott Barnes in Oregon State spoke to the Big 12 recently, reached out to the Big 12 and the ACC recently about joining that conference, I think that is very telling about what is happening in the Pac-12. And I would also point out real quick, what has Scott Barnes always said about his athletic department? I'm always going to do what puts my athletes in a position to compete at the highest level of their sport. I think it's one of the endearing lines that came out of the Pac-12 meltdown. When Scott Barnes at the 11th hour was out calling the Big 10, was out calling the Big 12, was out calling the ACC, was out calling the SEC.
Doing everything he could.
And it was just too late. It was just too late. And Oregon State fan was talking about how they were going to burn their diplomas and they were going to burn all their gear and they were never going to go to the new research and blaming Oregon State. I think certainly there is blame to go around. But if you think Scott Barnes is just hanging out, waiting for the grant of rights, the ink on the grant of rights with the Pac-12 to dry, I think you're out of your damn mind.
Yeah.
Because I think Scott Barnes, and I said the same thing about UNLV, when you're a free agent, as Scott Barnes is even right now today, because he's only got this upcoming year, this 2025, he's only got a year and whatever it is, 10 days. He's a free agent. If he's not talking to the Big 12, are you surprised? I would be.
Right. Yeah.
If he's not talking to, great point by you for once,
I know.
about Stanford and Cal, right? Like that to me makes all the sense in the world. If you could get the Stanford and Cal deal, are you doing that if you're Oregon State?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Hell yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for my money, I don't have a problem with Scott Barnes trying to get back to a P4 if in fact he did that, like our sources are telling us. I'm very curious to see what that looks like. But I am again going to tell you, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Because what we're hearing is almost never the full story. We're hearing little sprinkles of, well, I wonder if the Mountain West would take those schools back. Hey, yeah, UNLV, actually, do they have money issues? Well, yeah, they're real close on their money and they're counting it, but they stayed in the Mountain West because they didn't like what they saw in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense than, well, UNLV's broke and they couldn't afford to sue the Mountain West, which we told you on this show was a bunch of malarkey. Malarkey.
Yeah.
Right? We told you that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's interesting. And for me, and the way I look at these things, I think we have no idea how tense things are behind the scenes. I know one thing, not everybody's sitting on like glassy, smooth water. There's not a chance in the world of that. Because when you have this kind of insecurity and these kind of conversations happening, and our sources, believe me or not, our sources are very familiar with those situations. And when you're asking about, hey, well, why don't you ask Scott Barnes about the Big 12? Well, you talked about UNLV. Have you asked Scott Barnes about the Big 12? No, but I will. And now I have, because I think it's a very fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And again, I want to point out, and then I'm going to get to the comment section. Again, I want to point out that nobody said, oh, no, that's not true about Scott Barnes. No, not one person we spoke to said that.
No.
And we asked a good bit of folks around college, hey, college football, have you heard about Scott Barnes and the Big 12? Well, it's funny. And what they do is they're like, well, I haven't heard specifically that Scott has done that. But when it's no, it's like, no, that's ridiculous. And then you ask the follow-up question, well, when you say it's ridiculous, because what most people will do in that situation is they'll say Scott is committed to the Pac-12 in the long term, and he is not, but we have not heard that one time. Not one time. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. All right. Whew. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Because again, I'm going to ask the question, do you think a merger is possible? I actually do think it's possible. And I've changed my opinion on that because 2 weeks ago, when we reported that they were going to mediation on the 19th, I said then, yeah, I just can't see them merging at this point. But when we're starting to hear that the exiting members of the Mountain West are open to the conversation of a merger, that's when a red flag goes up like, whoa. And then when you start talking to people involved in the situation on both sides, and they're like, well, yeah, of course we would. But then you hear it's a hard no when Gloria Navarez, the commissioner of the Mountain West, approaches, Teresa Gould in the Pac-12. No. My guess is Oregon State, Washington State, and Teresa Gould are against it.
Are you willing to let your conference die on premise? Because you will not set your pride aside.
I don't know. Pride is a very dangerous thing.
It is.
Pride is a very dangerous thing. All right, who's in? Let's see let me go all the way back to the top. Wow, you guys have been phenomenal with the comments today. First one in is TJ Beck. TJ, where have you been?
Yeah, where have you been, dude? Slacking?
TJ Beck
just spending too much time on your plane, or what's the deal, dude?
TJ Beck occasionally emails me.
Why are you emailing?
Because he sends me Canzano stories. Because I don't subscribe. Of course. He sends me Canzano stories because I'm not gonna. Frankly, I am not a fan of Mr. Canzano's.
No.
It's mainly because he lost me way back on the back of the envelope calculations, and has just
when they did the groundbreaking interview,
and they have just continued. John Canzano has continued on his podcast to be that guy. And I am not willing to play that game.
Back to the envelope calculations.
Yeah. Have you been letting the demons out again? What do you mean? If you're referring to the cough.
No, I think that's a reference. Is that a reference to the Bears rant to start the show last week? No. Or is that a cough reference?
I don't want to talk about them. Anybody see the Cubs last night? The Cubs last night. What did I tell you was going to happen? 2 outs, 0-2 count.
They're down to their last strike.
2 outs, 0-2 count. Fly ball to right. Mr. $8 billion contract waiting to happen, Kyle Tucker in right field. Does he catch it? Does he get back there? And, oh, yeah, Marty, I got it, buddy. This is for... Oh. Double. 4-pitch walk. Remember, 2 outs, 0-2 count, double, 4-pitch walk, double down the line. Cubs lose.
We're on to Cincinnati.
They lose 8-7. So you scored 7 runs. You got pretty good starting pitching outside of the 2 home runs. The bullpen was solid. Then you don't have a closer because why would you need a closer in the major leagues? And that leads you to absolutely falling on your face and losing the game. It is what it is. It is what it is. I just am, Conundrum says it's 3:00 in Arizona. Let's go. Hey, man, listen, we had stuff, bro.
Dude,
when I make the joke about, Jake being like typing like a man, dude, that was me before. Like the phone would not stop ringing. I'm trying to get stuff done. I'm like, come on, let's go. Let's go. Like trying to get it done. We're out of time.